Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That's better. Thank you all for being here. My name is Will Wade. I'm a local, lifelong resident of Dawson County, Georgia, and it is my esteemed honor to welcome you here today. We have a great program, as I like to say in Rotary, but it's an honor for us to have, I know, in this nation's history, the first presidential candidate to come to Dawson County. So I'm looking forward to being able to introduce him in a moment. But before we do that, we like to do things Dawson County style. So I'd like to, first, we're going to start off with an invocation. I'd like to ask one of our hosts, a friend of mine, Mr. John Kiefer, if he'll come forward and lead us in thanks.
Will you please bow your heads? Dear Lord, we are truly thankful for this day that you have given us and for the opportunity to live in this great country. Please be with us here, for we pray for your strength and guidance as we prepare ourselves for the selection of our next president. Help us to learn and to broaden our minds so that we may make the best decision for our country. Please, Lord, bless the men and women who are serving in our military, and bless our elected leaders. Thank you for the meal you have provided. Lord, bless this food to our use and us to thy service, and make us ever mindful of the needs of others. These things we pray in your name. Amen.
And at this time, if you will all rise for the presentation of our colors. One of this region's up-and-coming young singers, Miss Kayla Armstrong, as she leads us in our national anthem. could have a hand for our junior ROTC from Dawson County High School. You may be seated. There are many distinguished guests here among us. There are many folks that I would like to introduce to you, but today I will not single out any one person because I definitely don't want to miss anybody. But for those that are elected officials here today, I appreciate your service. For those that served in our military, if you're here today, I appreciate your service as well. Every single one of us is important, and most of you are friends, and I'm glad to see you all. So thank you for being here. I have the esteemed honor today to introduce to you our former Speaker of the United States House, Mr. Newt Gingrich. Many of you may know that in his term in office, he balanced the budget. The last time that's been done in our lifetime. Though not a native son of Georgia, he spent so many years serving us in our state house, as well as many other wonderful and great things for this state. He also was named Man of the Year in 1995 by Time Magazine. He was known as what's called the indispensable leader. He also was a teacher, an educator. He's a historian. He spent a life, and we got to hear earlier that in 1958 is when he started on his study of governance and what our country's about and where we need to be. And I know you didn't come here to hear from me, so I'm definitely going to turn it over to him at this time. But if you would all join in standing in appreciation for the presidential candidate of the United States, Mr. Newt Gingrich.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Will, I really appreciate you helping organize all this. We talked about it a while back at breakfast at the OK Cafe, and it all turned out to be a pretty good deal. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate each and every one of you coming out here today. I do have some old friends. I'm looking out and talking to folks. At a purely personal level, Harvey Cohen is here, and Harvey was my accountant for about 20-plus years until he retired and I didn't, so he's left me in the lurch, but nonetheless is a great friend, and we're very glad to have him here. Now, Harry Geisinger and I go back to the early 1960s when Harry was managing one of the very first successful Georgia campaigns for Congress before he became a very successful and very effective state representative in his own rights, and I'm really delighted to renew that friendship, and he's been tremendous in helping us statewide and helping us put together the campaign, along with, I must say, Maria Strollo down here, who has been running our Georgia operation, done a wonderful job and really helped put together we have lots of volunteers in our headquarters, and we're going to be growing in a very steady way, so I'm thrilled. And an old friend of mine with whom I have spent many hours on the radios here, Martha Zoller, and I just have to say hi to Martha because she has always been very gracious in covering me and giving me a chance to talk about ideas. In addition, I remember spending, I think it was 10 days on the road with Bubba McDonald back in the late 80s, and it's great to have you here and to have you supporting us and working with us. He does a great job as a public service commissioner, and Senator Gooch, we're really delighted that you're here, and I appreciate it very, very much. Will did organize all this, and I owe him a lot of thanks. In some ways, for the contract, both for the material up here and for the handouts that you all got, I owe even more debt to Millard Bowen and to Kevin Beckman, because they actually got it all printed on very short notice, and they enabled us to look very good at a national stage in Des Moines last Thursday. So you guys just take a bow for a second. I really owe you a debt of gratitude, and I think everybody here should thank you for being above and beyond the service. So please. Now, these are the sort of things you don't notice until they don't work. Then you realize how really valuable this was. And I have to tell you, I had pushed my team very hard to get this done by last Thursday so we could unveil it in Des Moines, Iowa, for obvious reasons relating to the first caucus in the country. And I knew we had gotten the technical work done, but I had no idea the brochures had gotten done, and I certainly had no idea that these two had gotten done. If you see the C-SPAN coverage, these show up very prominently in the C-SPAN coverage. And so thank you, guys. It really made us look very, very good, and I'm delighted. I also want to mention David Thompson, who is heading up our Effective Government Now program, which is a key part, if you look at this, of number 5 of balancing the federal budget. And so we're delighted to have all of you here. I want to talk for a minute about where we are and give you a flavor, and then if it's okay, I'm going to take questions. This is, I really think this is the kind of opportunity to be home and to let you have a chance to ask what you want to ask about. But I'm probably a little different than most people who run for office, and including the presidency. I got into this because my dad was a career soldier. I actually got to Georgia through Fort Benning, where my dad was assigned there. I took very seriously, between my freshman and sophomore years of high school, living in France and then moving to Germany, that countries can die, that bad leadership can just kill you. And as a result of what I had seen with the fall of the French Fourth Republic and the paratroopers bringing de Gaulle back to create the Fifth Republic, I concluded in August between my freshman and sophomore years in high school that I would devote my life to 3 things. What does America need to do to be successful? How can you communicate it so the American people would allow you to do it and support you in doing it? And how would you implement it if they gave you approval? My first real campaign was as a volunteer in 1960 for the Nixon Lodge campaign in Muskogee County, at a time when the entire Georgia State Republican Party was somewhat smaller than this room. I dropped out of college for a year to run a congressional campaign for Jack Prince, who worked for Jewel Chicken and lived in Gainesville. So I came to North Georgia and campaigned, and it was a very educational experience. At that time, I think Dawsonville was about 1,800 people. And the roads were all 2-lane, and it was a different world. I ran for Congress in '74 and lost during Watergate, in '76 and lost with Jimmy Carter at the head of the Democratic ticket, finally won in '78. And I began a project that took 16 years to create the first Republican majority in 40 years. And then we governed well enough with the contract with America that we became the first re-elected Republican majority since 1928. Now, I give you that as background because when we discussed running for president, the only real reason for doing it was the depth of trouble we're in as a country. And I decided that it was very important to only run if I could have an adult conversation with the American people, lay out what's really at stake, and lay out a real set of solutions. So we haven't gotten to the slogan phase of this campaign yet, because I wanted to start with a solution phase. If you go to newt.org, you'll see 27 pages, which are the beginning phase of the contract. I want to emphasize this. When we did the contract with America in 1994, behind this very simple list of 10 were 700 pages of legislation. And people could look at it, and the news media could look at it, and you might agree or you might disagree, but nobody in 1994 said it wasn't real. They didn't think we'd win a majority. In fact, 2 weeks before the election, the 2 leading experts in Washington each said in 2 different interviews that Republicans would get 26 seats. They were off by 100%. We got 53, and we won a majority. Because the contract in 1994 was so totally positive, 9 million additional Americans voted that year for the Republicans. It's the largest one-party increase in American history for an off-year election. Now, I had learned this stuff in 1980 working with Ronald Reagan. The first Capitol Steps event was not in 1994. The first Capitol Steps event was in 1980 when Mac Mattingly was running for the U.S. Senate against Herman Talmadge. and when nobody believed we could win the Senate. And we convinced the Reagan team, and particularly the governor himself, that if we could bring every House and Senate candidate in to stand on the steps with Governor Reagan, if we could stand for 5 very simple ideas, that would give the candidates such credibility and such news coverage that it would be the margin. We won 6 U.S. Senate races by a combined total of 75,000 votes. I remember on Wednesday morning, I was out shaking hands and saying thank you at the Delta Jet Base, and the Atlanta papers called to say, what do you think about Mac Mattingly having won? Well, when I went to bed, Mac Mattingly was behind by 40,000 votes. And I said, really? I said, yeah, when the last precincts in Cobb County came in, he won the Senate seat. And Mac was one of the 6 who won by a narrow margin. We did the same thing in '94 because we said, if we're positive, if we give candidates who've never run before something positive to campaign on, it can be the margin of difference. And we were right. We then actually kept our word. Everything in the 1994 contract with America was voted on in the first 93 days. Now, this is a very different contract. Let me be quite clear. We are in much more trouble than we were in 1980 or 1994. And frankly, I've had the additional years to think about what didn't work. Well, what is it Reagan didn't achieve? What is it that we didn't achieve? And my conclusion was that the underlying power of the elites, whether it's in the news media or the academic community or the bureaucracies or the courts, are much deeper and much more entrenched than either Reagan thought or than I thought. And so if you're really serious about turning America around, you have to have a program that's really serious. Now, let me ask you 3 quick questions, just a show of hands. How many of you believe America is significantly on the wrong track? Okay. How many of you think that being on the wrong track is deeper and broader than just Barack Obama? Virtually all of you, right? Very important. This can't be just about the White House. How many of you believe that changing things fundamentally in Washington will be very hard? And how many of you think that the elites will fight very hard to stop us from changing it even after the election? Now, the reason I'm walking you through this is I just explained the rationale for my candidacy. I have a lot of good friends running for office. You're not going to hear me be negative about any of them. And let me say, by the way, as a Georgian, every Georgian should be proud of Herman Cain right now. Starting with the Florida straw poll, Herman Cain has decisively proven that the elite media was wrong to suggest it was a 2-person race. And I think he and I are in the process together of proving that ideas may be more important than money in how you run for the presidency, and that all this focus on how much money did you raise may not matter as the expensive consultants watch their candidate gradually decay. And so this is going to be a lot of fun. And I believe that every Georgian can come together in thinking that we ought to have a Georgian on the ticket, and then we'll argue later about which of us. But I'll tell you, it is encouraging that if you add our 2 numbers together in the last poll, we have more support than Romney or Perry. And I think that gap is going to get bigger over the next few weeks. That's because both of us are being positive. Both of us are coming up with ideas. And so I think we should all be happy with them. Now, I obviously think I would make a better president. And I'm going to tell you why in a very positive way. I think actually developing an in-depth program for changing Washington is very hard. I think this contract is a huge step in that direction. I also believe getting it done is very hard. I worked with Reagan in the early 1980s when Tip O'Neill was Speaker. The Democrats had a majority, and we had to get about 1/3 of the Democrats to vote with us to pass things. And I know when we passed, for example, the Reagan tax cuts, we got about 1/3 of the Democrats to vote yes. I know when I was Speaker in 1995 to 1999, nothing would get passed into law unless we could figure out a way to get Bill Clinton to sign it. And so you had to have some ability to work with a liberal Democrat in the White House if you want. You know, we balanced the budget for 4 years. I'll give you a set of numbers that we just discovered that are so astonishing, I frankly initially thought that my research team had lost their minds. When I became Speaker, the projected deficit for the next 10 years was $2,700,000,000,000. When I left as Speaker, the projected surplus was $2,200,000,000,000. That is a swing of $4.9 trillion in the U.S. fiscal position. Against our current economy, it would be about an $8 trillion swing. Now, to put that in perspective, and this is a number that really blew me away. They figured out yesterday, if you go and look at the Congressional Budget Office, and if we can raise enough money, I suspect this will presently become a full-page ad. They looked the other day and figured out the Congressional Budget Office, when I was sworn in, projected the total U.S. debt in a decade would be 56% of the gross domestic product. I think right now it's above 70. They projected the year I left office that total federal debt would be 12%, because we were bringing the debt down while we were growing the economy. Unemployment went from 5.6 down to 4.2%. Let me tell you, we had 4.2% unemployment right now. Housing prices would be up. Everybody would be happier, and we'd be in pretty good shape. That's how we. So I just want to start with the notion. I'm the only candidate running who has successfully reformed an entitlement, welfare. The only candidate running who successfully passed a national tax cut. The only candidate running who helped create 11 million new jobs in 4 years, far more than any of my good friends who cite their record in the States. And the only candidate running who actually switched the fiscal position in the United States dramatically in 4 years' time. And that's the background for my running. Briefly on the contract. There are actually 4 parts to it. This is the legislative part. The first part of the contract is legislation which I believe will take a year to complete passing. Some of it you can do in the opening day. You could repeal Obamacare within 2 weeks. But the replacement will take time. I think we have a very robust job creation program. I don't want to go into the details because I want to save time for Q&A, but if you go to newt.org, you'll see lots of details. Very strong job creation program, both deregulation, just pure out of Reagan's playbook, deregulation, tax cuts, creating American energy, and praising people who create jobs. Not complicated. Class warfare kills jobs. Bureaucratic socialism kills jobs. Liberating small business, praising entrepreneurs, encouraging investors creates jobs. So we have a very robust tax cut program starting with zero capital gains, which will bring hundreds of billions of dollars into the U.S. A 12.5% corporate tax rate to liberate the $1.2 trillion in profits kept overseas right now. 100% expensing for all new equipment. So if you are a farmer or a factory or a doctor or an office, you could write off all new equipment in 1 year, which would lead us to be the most modern and most productive workforce in the world. 100% complete abolition of the death tax, so families could focus on creating jobs rather than on trying to avoid taxes. And an optional flat tax, so if you wanted to, you could keep the current tax code, but if you preferred a one-page flat tax, you could sign on to it. Deregulation starts with repealing Dodd-Frank, which we could do the first week, repealing Sarbanes-Oxley, which has been just a tremendous regulatory burden, replacing the Environmental Protection Agency with a brand new Environmental Solutions Agency, committed to the idea of being collaborative. Replacing the current Food and Drug Administration with a 21st century Food and Drug Administration whose job would be to be in the laboratory, actually accelerating new science getting to the patient, not obstructing it. It's a fundamental difference. And if you look at the Wall Street Journal piece this morning by Scott Gottlieb, you'll see how the current FDA actually kills people by slowing down the introduction of new technology. He cites a particular breakthrough in healthcare that has been legal in Germany for 4 years and is just now beginning to be made legal here, even though it clearly was safe and clearly should have been on the market. Third, I believe we want to have an American energy system made up of American energy production, and I believe it is an enormous opportunity to keep $400 billion a year here at home. It's better for our economy, it's better for our national security, it creates jobs, and it increases revenues. I've got a piece I'm writing right now for the Super Committee. There are 3 ways you create revenue without raising taxes. You put people back to work so that they are paying taxes because they have jobs rather than drawing unemployment, food stamps, Medicaid, automatically the biggest single step towards a balanced budget. Second, you create American energy so American energy companies pay royalties. You automatically increase federal revenue because you're keeping the money at home. And the Saudis and the Iraqis and the Iranians and the Venezuelans don't pay royalties to the United States government. American companies do if they're producing energy in the U.S. Third, you liberate American property that we own that the U.S. government has locked up. We own 69% of Alaska. I reminded Governor Perry the other night, without trying to hurt his feelings, that Alaska is twice the size of Texas. If we the people own 69% of Alaska, we own 1.5 times the size of Texas. So you could take a half of Texas, 125,000 square miles, give it to the environmentalists and say, fine, pick the places you care about, and we can now preserve them. That leaves you 250,000 square miles to develop. Now that's how big the difference is. 91% of the known mineral resources on federal land are currently restricted by the Bureau of Land Management. It makes no sense at all. And so those 3 areas can increase revenue without raising taxes. I think we can save Medicare and Social Security. I think they're fundamentally different problems. If you go back to 4% unemployment, Social Security is safe for a long time. That gives you the time to say to younger Americans, if you would like to have a personal Social Security account, that should be your option. You will get a much bigger payment in the long run if you start saving at 16 or 20 or 25 years of age. And you will control it, the politicians won't. And it will be your estate, whereas it is not today. And so I think there are a lot of good arguments for making it an option for younger people. And frankly, their net advantage is so huge, I think you'd find 90% of younger Americans would take that option. On Medicare, you start with something very bold and very decisive. Stop paying the crooks. We wrote a book at the Center for Health Transformation 3 years ago called, the title of the book is Stop Paying the Crooks. We thought even in Washington that would get through. Didn't have any impact. Medicare and Medicaid are so badly run by the federal government. You have paper-based bureaucrats competing with crooks who use BlackBerries and iPads. The result is, our estimate is that you pay between $70 and $120 billion a year to crooks. I mean genuine thieves. I don't mean marginal mistakes. I mean a dentist who filed 989 procedures in one day. He got paid for it. So you look at that model. We went to American Express, Visa, MasterCard, and IBM. American Express has a powerful anti-fraud system. I mean, how many of you have ever been called by your credit card company to make sure it was really you making the purchase? Okay, so this is not a theory, right? This is what drives you crazy about trying to change. This is why I'm running for president. You have an entire national capital which goes, oh, gee, I never heard of that. American Express pays 0.03 of 1% to crooks. Medicaid in New York State pays more than 10%. More than 1 out of every $10 in New York State Medicaid is paid to a crook. So as a taxpayer, you are 330 times, that's 33,000% more likely to pay a crook in Medicaid than in American Express. Now that's absurd. So take that model of management, apply it across the board, give senior citizens more choices to get to a marketplace, to competition, but make them choices. Do not try to force change on Medicare. Seniors love the right to choose, and they hate to be forced to choose. And so there's a way to save Medicare, frankly. I think I chaired the Medicare task force in '96 when we saved it for 15 years. I'm confident we can save it again. Fifth, balance the federal budget, and there, in addition to my own experience, I did say the other day that having balanced the budget for 4 straight years, the only time in your lifetime, I'm the only speaker in your lifetime to have led a balanced budget effort for 4 straight years. Paid off $405 billion in national debt. I am actually my own consultant on how to balance the budget. There's a group called Strong America Now, and we've turned it into Effective Government Now. It basically says if you apply modern management techniques to the federal government, you save about $500 billion a year. Now, you start from there, and you go to a few other things, and you pretty rapidly get to a balanced federal budget, particularly if you get people back to work, get them off welfare, off Medicare, off Medicaid, off food stamps, off unemployment. And we would deal with unemployment compensation by turning it into a worker training program and saying, if you can't find a job and you need help, we'll give it to you, but we will only give it to you if you sign up with a business to get trained, so that we're using your time to become a more productive worker. We're not giving you any money to do nothing. Sixth, you have my commitment to control the border by January 1, 2014. Ronald Reagan writes in his diary in 1986, he was signing the Simpson-Mazzoli Act because we have to get the border controlled. 25 years ago. People who tell you we can't control the border is nonsense. Japanese attacked us on December 7, 1941. We defeated them in August 1945. 44 months. In 3 years and 8 months, we defeated Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. So the border, I would suggest 2 starting points to control the border. The first is a bill which we're drafting now, which says no current regulation or law will inhibit the government of the United States from seizing control of the border. No environmental impact statements, no lengthy complexities, just do it. That's how we fought World War II. Second, there are 23,000 Department of Homeland Security workers in the Washington, D.C. area. I am prepared to move half of them to Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if that's what it takes to control the border. Seventh, and this is something I think I'm going to talk about at the Citadel on Thursday, we have to have a fundamental rediscussion of national security. It's way too complicated to go into today. Let me just say to you, it comes in at least 4 major components. One is those in the Middle East who would like to kill us, and we need to have an honest conversation and at least have the courage to describe accurately who they are. The second is to recognize that the real competition with China is inside the U.S. If we fix our bureaucracies, if we fix our economy, if we rebuild our science and technology education, if we rebuild our manufacturing base, Chinese can't compete with us in the next 50 years. If we fail to do what's right for America, it's not our fault that they're not as stupid as our government. And so I think we need to understand that this is a serious long-term strategic challenge that we need to address. Third, there are various new technologies that are very dangerous, from cyber warfare to electromagnetic pulse to dirty bombs to nuclear weapons. We are not today prepared to survive the kind of threat that is emerging technologically, some of which can be used by very small opponents. And finally, we have to recognize the existence worldwide of a criminal system, an underclass, what George Tenet, former head of the CIA, called the gray world. 800,000 people a year are sold into slavery around the world, 90% of them female, almost all of it for sex. The fact is you have a drug cartel in Mexico that is threatening to destabilize the government of our nearest neighbor in a way that we cannot tolerate, much of it driven by American money because we tolerate a drug addiction in this country that makes no sense at all as a society. So we have to have a conversation about what you do about very large-scale worldwide crime that is itself becoming a threat to civilized society. Eighth, the next couple are very different. I believe we have an opportunity to break through on medical research in ways that are stunning. I'll just give you one example. If we could postpone the onset of Alzheimer's by 5 years, you save between 8 and 10 trillion dollars by 2050. That's almost the entire federal debt. Alzheimer's alone is a $20 trillion projected cost, public and private, between now and 2050, 1.5 times the size of our federal debt. Then you add in Parkinson's, then you add in autism, then you add in mental health. I believe brain science, and I know this is very unusual for a politician to talk about, but I believe if you're serious about solving problems, you got to go where the solutions are. And the solutions aren't always the last generation's political knowledge. And so that's an area we're going to work on very aggressively. Friday at the Value Voters Conference, I'm going to lay out rebalancing the courts. We have gone through a 50-year cycle of the U.S. federal judiciary becoming grotesquely out of control. We had a judge on June 1st in San Antonio who said that his view, Judge Berry's his name, he said his view is, he issued a ruling that not only could high school students not pray at their graduation, they could not use the word God, they could not use the word benediction, they could not ask the audience to stand. He had a whole list of these things. And he said, and if any of these are violated, he was going to lock up in jail the superintendent. Now, that is a judge so viciously anti-religious and therefore anti-American, we should abolish his court because he should not be a U.S. federal judge. Number 9 is going to be a very sophisticated and serious explanation of the balance of power and what Alexander Hamilton meant in the Federalist Papers when he said the courts will never take on the executive and legislative branch because they will lose. This whole 50-year cycle of judicial supremacy is an absurdity. And those two are the two boldest things here. Lastly, we are going to actually enforce the 10th Amendment, which means returning power back home. Now, that's a big change. Part 2 of the contract is going to be on the first day. It's a very simple model. Shortly after the inaugural address, I will start signing executive orders. We'll take about an hour and a half. We're going to sign between 50 and 200 executive orders. The first will abolish all of the White House czars as of that moment. There's a space at newt.org where you can submit your favorite executive order. We're having experts review it. We're going to have people review it. All the executive orders will be online by October 1 of next year. Everybody will know for the last month of the campaign what the executive orders are. And if President Obama says he favors one of them, we'll just hand it to him and let him sign it right then and there. The third part of the contract is very different, and that is we're going to have an explicit training program for all the people on the transition team and an explicit training program for all the presidential appointees. The level of change we're describing requires a team that knows what it's doing. And if you have to be trained in summer camp to play pro football, you surely have to be trained to fundamentally change the entire federal government. This will be a very different approach and a very different model of serious change. And finally, this is the last piece, and I want to just share with you, if there's a single quote that helps explain where I'm coming from, it's from Abraham Lincoln. You know, Lincoln, as a lawyer, had one partner, never managed anything before he became president. Served briefly as a volunteer in the Black Hawk War, had no real military experience. Ends up fighting a civil war in which 620,000 Americans are killed. Ends up mobilizing an enormous amount of resources, running an enormous machine. And it isn't going very well. The Army of Northern Virginia under Robert E. Lee is beating the Union Army pretty decisively. At best, they're fighting to a standstill. And Lincoln is wrestling with how can he communicate where we are? And so in December of 1862, he sends a message to Congress, and this is the key paragraph, and I think it applies to us today so decisively that I wanted to share it with you. He said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country." Now, I give you that because the last point in the contract is that I'm not going to ask you to be for me. Because if you're for me, you'll vote, go home and say, I sure hope he fixes it. And I'm here to report to you what I am describing can't possibly be done by one person, not under the American Constitution. For this to work, I have to ask you to be with me for 8 years, to be with me for a long struggle, to recognize that the forces of reaction, the forces of bureaucracy, the forces of the elites are going to fight us every day. I'm prepared to spend 8 years of my life getting this country back on track for your children and grandchildren, for my children and my 2 grandchildren. But I have no illusions. This may well be the most difficult presidency in 150 years if we're serious. And so I need your help. I need your help not just today. And the fourth part is to create a citizen movement that stays together, that has genuine two-way communication. A lot of this we're having to invent. Nobody's ever done this before. But as Lincoln said, we cannot allow ourselves to be trapped by the dogmas of the past. We have to invent a system of this kind. I'm very grateful that you give me this much attention and allow me to explain what I'm doing. It is a serious business. It is an exciting business. This has been the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's only the land of the free because it's the home of the brave. We have to once again be brave enough to reclaim our own country, to set it back on the right track, and to do whatever it is that America needs in order to remain free, safe, and prosperous. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions for a minute or two. I don't want to keep you too long, but if anybody has 1 or 2 quick questions, we'll be glad to. I should say also, by the way, if you like this, please tell your friends to go to newt.org, just my first name, and send them. Bubba? Sure. Yeah, well, the biggest obstacle is money. I mean, what happened was 2 big things that stopped us in our tracks. One was which we expected, was the elite media attacked me pretty savagely for about 2 months. And every time you turned on any show, they said, well, Gingrich is dead. And then for a little while, they just didn't cover me at all. And so we had to go through a cycle where June and July were very hard. I would say in all the campaigns I've been in, including 2 defeats in the 70s, that probably June and July were the 2 hardest political months I've ever had. And so that slowed us down. And then, frankly, we brought in very good consultants, almost all of whom currently work for Rick Perry. And I don't mean that negatively. They're smart people. The governor actually blessed them coming to work for me because he didn't plan to run. And we had a real cultural difference. I mean, this is not what Republican consultants do. This is positive, complicated, issue-oriented. It's a totally different model. And so we wasted 4 months with me trying to get them to go where I want to go and them trying to get me to be a normal candidate. And finally I said, you know, I'd be glad to have you run my campaign. I can't possibly be your candidate. And they said, well, they had no idea how to do what I'm doing. So we had to reset ourselves. We had a very much better August. We had a very good September in terms of growing. Not big by the standard of guys like Perry and Romney, but big enough that we're growing. Our biggest challenge, candidly, is money. I mean, if I knew that we could raise $5 or $10 million between now and January 1st, I suspect I could tell you the odds would be 90% we'd win the nomination. But what we are doing is we get a tremendous amount of earned media, and we have been growing very rapidly. We're about where I wanted to be. I don't want to be the front runner right now. We're not prepared to deal with the news media at that level, and we're not prepared to deal with Romney's attacks. And Mitt wants to be the nominee, and he's got lots of money, and he's going to attack as you watch these Perry-Romney ads. I mean, I don't want to be in that business. I'm in the business of talking about this. Every day it's growing. We had 36,000 people on Thursday come to our site and take the platform, which I think for a 27-page document in politics is pretty close to amazing. And gradually it's starting to spread. And I think as you see more of us fleshing it out, like this Friday at the Values Voter Summit, every time we do something like that, it expands where we're going. So I think we've got to stay in the race long enough. My personal guess is you're going to see a number of folks who look pretty good right now end up not looking pretty. Remember when Bachman was the flavor of the month, and she's a nice person. I'm not attacking her. But if you remember when Pawlenty was the establishment candidate? I mean, you go back and look at, folks come and folks go. And I told somebody this morning that it's like Aesop's fable about the tortoise and the hare. It turned out I got to be the tortoise. But we're moving forward every single day. Anybody you know in Iowa, anybody you know in New Hampshire, anybody you know in South Carolina is like gold. Please get their names to Maria. We need every single person. Anybody you know who will volunteer to come to our headquarters and call. Because nowadays with modern telecommunication, we have 35 or 40 phones calling into Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. And then anybody you know who might be interested in donating, just tell them to go to newt.org. We need their help. Yes, sir. My position on the sanctity of human life is that life begins at conception, and there are certain exceptions, life of the mother, and I think as a realistic matter, you probably would have rape and incest in order to pass the bill, but I think life begins at inception. I am totally opposed to late-term abortions, and that's where I would start working back. One of the executive orders on the opening day would reinstate Reagan's Mexico City policy, that no U.S. tax money will be spent overseas paying for abortion. And one of the earliest fights would be to defund Planned Parenthood, which is the leading abortion provider in the United States. The unintended consequences are unknown. I mean, the biggest unintended consequence for us is we just blew apart Christmas, we're really looking at our own schedule. It's very hard for me to tell you right now, and here's why. All these things turn out to be a lot more complicated than you think. Nobody right now is a serious front runner. I mean, Romney's at 23%, but nobody's a serious front runner. I can imagine a circumstance where you get to the Georgia primary, which I think will be March 3rd or 4th, and you still have virtually everybody in the race because everybody won just a little bit and nobody got knocked out. It's not clear to me that you may be on the road because you have this proportional representation requirement before March 1. So, states like Florida are supposedly going to lose half their delegates, and they're going to be divided up proportionally. Well, if that had happened last time, McCain would not have won the nomination, in my judgment. I think probably Romney would have outlasted him financially. So you don't know what's going to happen. The other thing to remember, and I'll just close this, but it's part of why somebody said to me that they thought the other day I was having fun, and they're right. I mean, this is the most creative period of my life. I'm bringing to bear everything I've ever learned. I have this wonderful opportunity. I'm not advising anybody. I'm just doing it. So I don't have to go and try to explain to some candidate why they should be. For example, this afternoon when I announced that we should fire Secretary Chu for being either complicit or just stupid, but the idea that you can't give away billions of dollars the way he's giving it away and stay in office. I didn't have to go and consult with anybody. I mean, I could say, yeah, that's right, let's do it. So I'm having a great time, and I'm enjoying it. One of the great secrets of this business is candidates actually matter. This is something consultants like to think money matters. The news media likes to think money matters. Yeah, it's useful, but it's not. McCain got outspent by Romney 10-1 in Florida and beat him. Okay? If you get into 4 different primaries on the same day on the 28th, nobody, except Obama, nobody has enough money to buy ads. You can't buy enough ads. And so it begins to be an earned media fight. If it's an earned media fight, actually knowing something is a huge advantage. Thank you all very, very much.
In Dawson County, we love a lot of things. We love sports, we love football, and we love our country. So I want to read this to you, and on behalf of the citizens of Dawson County and even North Georgia, I'd like to read this to you. Flip 1 for the Gipper. The Ronald Reagan National Football Coin Toss took place in this country from September 23rd to 26th, and it continues And if you would all remain standing while we have the removal of our colors. Thank you. Well, folks, we just made a little bit of history for Dawson County, and I appreciate you being a part of it. I'd like to also thank our host, Mr. Vernon Smith, on his contribution of the use of this facility today. Vernon, thank you very much for what you do for this community. And to each of you for being here today, because I think that this is going to be a step, quite frankly, closer to election 2012, and I think that one day we will say, do you remember when President Gingrich came to Dawsonville? Thank you for being here. You're at liberty to go.